Howard, Michele, Marty, December 13th.
All right, so
How do you introduce yourselves first?
He's Marty.
This is Marty Snyderman. This is Michele Hall.
one in the middle is Howard Hall.
There you go.
I met Howard in 1975. I graduated from the NASDS Diving Instructors College as the least qualified diving instructor in the history of diving. And I'd made 27 scuba dives in my life.
27.
27
You told me
in my
35.
life. Well, that was after I made 12 more dives.
No, not a,
Yeah, so I got hired at the
He can't
diving locker,
subtract either.
but you had to learn the diving locker way. So I was an instructor because I had a patch on my jacket that said diving instructor, but I didn't know what I was doing. And they put me in Howard's class, which didn't help me a whole lot. But they put me night diving one night. That's the story I really remember. After after a pool session.
I remember that. I remember that.
And we went.
You said, anytime you're going to go diving, I'm in. I want to go. Anytime you're going to go, I'm in. And I said, well, we're going to go dive in the canyon tonight. You want to go? Yeah, I'm in. So we did.
And afterwards, he said, well, what'd you think? And I said, I didn't know you could see that far at night. I'd never made a 60-foot dive, swam a half mile out to the buoy. And what I remember is I was really, really cold at 90 feet. I was really cold at 110 feet. And I hit about 140 feet. I got really warm. I really liked it. and I had no idea. I was overmatched.
Well,
So.
what cracked me up about it is that, Marty was a diving instructor. I didn't know he had 27 dives. That night, we would make deep dives in the La Jolla Canyon, which is not a novice dive. And we'd go down to 150 feet. And so we swim out about almost half mile, and then we drop into La Jolla Canyon and we descend to 150 feet. And I turned around and Marty's kind of behind me and a little bit tentative. And by the time we get to 150 feet, he's like a little bit, comfortable. Because not only did I learn later, it's his first night dive, but it's the first time he's ever been below 75 feet. And he said, I've never been on a night dive before. And I went, what?
Wait, I told you that afterwards.
I know you did.
I was lying then. I'd been on one by that time.
Yeah, he'd been on one.
Yeah. So anyway, what I learned that night was to hang out with if I could survive it.
Come back alive, yeah. Well, so that's how we got together.
What year was that?
1975.
Or 74. You sure it was 75?
75.
Well,
a few months
I came
before
to
we
California.
met, right?
I came to California in January 1st, 1975.
Probably was about then.
So it was met
And then
you.
I met you when I walked in the diving locker to sign up for.
That's when I met you.
How about that? And
Yeah,
you met
about
my
that.
mom.
I did.
So I met Marty.
Phyllis.
I met Marty before I met Howard because I went in and signed up for my scuba class.
And I had a deal with Marty. I gave him $5 for every pretty girl he signed up for my classes. And so.
Complete exaggeration. Howard's never given me $5 in his life. But what really happened is Michele and I have a long story about this, but I put Michele in Howard's class because this little girl came in to sign up, and I'd seen Howard. I thought he was really good with children, so I put Michele in there, and she
So
seduced
rude.
her diving instructor.
So no. But it is true that I met Marty first, signed up for my scuba class. He put me in Howard's class,
And she was on me like a leech on a pig.
stop. I don't do that.
I benefited well.
Okay. So we met in May of 75.
Right. She was not a good student.
I
She
knew
showed
that.
up late.
Only once.
She showed up late, and when
Only
I gave her
once.
recommendations of things to buy, she didn't do it. She didn't follow it. She bought the cheap stuff. Got rescued a couple times,
Only once.
and then I
learned.
felt obligated to keep my eye on her because she's a liability, and I didn't want her to go out and kill herself outside the class diving with
So
somebody else.
rude.
So I've been on her ever since.
Good. And you taught
38
me,
years.
You taught me underwater photography.
That's right.
38 years married, but we've known each other longer than that.
So when did we meet you, Eric?
Oh, that's a good question. I remember, I'm pretty sure I met Howard and Michele at my first demo. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so I was 12. It was 2003 probably? 2002 or 2003.
I think this is the first time we've been diving together.
I think so, too.
I think that's right. So.
Yeah. And I only dove with Howard and Michele on a Channel Islands trip a handful of years ago.
Yeah, just before Mako was born. Your last outing before Mako was
Yeah.
born. That was
5 years ago, right?
yeah, New Year's Eve trip.
Yeah. So there was a lot of history before I came in, obviously.
28 years. So yeah, we got a little jump start on you.
But one of my favorite stories, and knowing that you guys work together a lot in filmmaking, has nothing to do with underwater, except it was pre-underwater, getting ready to fly to go out on a film shoot and driving up
Australia.
the freeway to LAX.
Yep.
Do you remember what happened?
Well, I remember it was my van. It was an older van, and Marty said, "You're on fire here." And I said, "No, what happens, Marty, is the oil's been leaking out and landing on the exhaust pipe, and it's smoke, but it's not really." He says, "I got flames here," and I looked over, and there was flames coming out from under the dash.
And we were going to Australia. It was a Wild Kingdom shoot.
Okay.
And I had my passport and wallet in a bag in front of my feet. It burned the front of my cover off my passport. And today, you'd never get through TSA
that's
with
right.
that. But I remember
This would have been in the 80s.
Well, the
No.
first thing is we went and you came up and got the van.
No.
Later.
You know, that's one of the things that happens, you know, when you get older, you start forgetting this stuff and getting it wrong.
But one of the things that's happened forever is you interrupting me. So,
Just trying to help you out.
Wrong.
Because I
The
might be
first
wrong.
thing that happens, we pulled over to the side,
Eric,
and
can you turn this damn camera off?
I had a fire extinguisher.
Yes, and you got out and put the almost.
Right.
And put the fire extinguisher down somewhere, and we were kind of shaking and all. It was a little unnerving. And then the van caught on fire again, and Howard didn't know where he'd put the fire extinguisher. So then we were on the side of the road, but we were really close to the checkpoint,
That's right.
to the San Clemente checkpoint.
Exactly.
And I walked up to the checkpoint and flagged down a truck to take us to LAX, almost.
Holding a hand.
Right, that's exactly right. Holding money in my hand.
Yeah.
And that truck broke down before we got to LAX. The guy's brother picked us up
In another
in
flatbed
another
truck.
flatbed truck. And I remember going into the airport. We were way late. And we were going to go and look at lenses. We'd gone
Yeah.
way up early that day. And I remember going in there saying, we look like we've been in a fire. We smell like we just go to Australia. And they let us on the plane. And then we got through.
And Howard
Yeah.
called me. I was at home.
Right.
Sorry, did you
I
have
said,
more?
"Michele, the van's on the side of the freeway at the border check. Get it fixed. I'll see you in a month."
What? And I dealt with AAA and managed to get them to come up and tow the truck back and get it fixed. Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Thank you. I'm not.
And you're right. I mean, going through TSA, well, there was no TSA
Right.
then. There was,
Right.
but if you'd had to deal with your passport, looking like it did that day, you wouldn't have made it.
We could have taken the van home.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Or waited for AAA.
So you asked us one of the stories that we were talking about. We started blue shark diving. Howard and Larry Cochran were doing some here. So they'd always been in the cage. The whole shark thing in the 1970s, nobody was doing that. It was really on the cutting edge and really a new thing. And we would go out there and spend time in that cage and kind of rotate. And one day, I was in the cage. Steve Early and I were in the cage. And we were supposed to do these little hand signals, jerk, going to work it all. And then they would tow the cage back to the boat, and you could just get up on the swim step, and you wouldn't have to swim out and endanger yourself. We tugged and we tugged. Howard and Larry didn't do anything. And that was their experiment.
It was an experiment, yeah.
To see if it was safe for man to swim with sharks.
I said, Larry, they're going to run out of there sooner or later. They're going to have to swim back.
And so we did.
Yeah.
And you survived. Thank you.
Marty has always said, if he ever gets bit by a shark, he says, I don't want to live. I don't want to live. I don't want to be mangled and damaged. I don't want to live that way. So if I get bit by a shark, just blow me away. Just blow me away. And we carried power heads with us, which were horrendous weapons. They could blow a hole in you about that big around. And I had carried one with me in case a mako or a white shark got aggressive. And bit on the little finger. There was a little cut right there. And he said, look, show it to me. And I loaded up the power head and came after him.
And I almost drowned. Yeah, it's my friend Howard.
Be careful what you say.
So Marty, were you shooting by then underwater?
Yeah, badly. Yeah, I shot at him.
How did all that start for you?
Well, that was really became a diving instructor. I wanted to get in to making movies and shooting still photographs underwater. It's why I came to California. I had no idea what the path was, but I knew about the diving locker, and I knew that there were some people into film there, and so I somehow talked my way into going out on the shark cage days, and that's what happened. And got Nikona's cameras. First piece of camera equipment was an underwater strobe. So.
And what about collaborations on projects between the two? Are there any? Did you do any
Collaborations on what?
projects?
Film projects.
Him and me?
Why
Well,
would we do that?
we did 14 episodes of Wild Kingdom together, where we were two cameras doing. We traveled all over the world. The Wild Kingdom production company had by then done over 200 shows, and so finding things that were new to do was difficult. And they just said, any idea you've got, we don't care if it's risky. We just, we'll take a chance that you don't get a show. If that happens, that's okay. So just whatever you want to do. So we just think up stuff. We went to Guadalupe Island, and when was that?
Late 70s,
Late-
early 80s.
Early
maybe.
80s. We were the first ones to go down there and film great white sharks. Now everybody's down there all the time, but we were the first ones, as far as I know, to go down and film great white sharks down there. And it was on Wild Kingdom's budget, and they encouraged us to do it, and we got a show.
And filmed outside the cage and dived outside the cage,
Yeah.
just looking around to see if we could find a white shark.
That's right. The first one, I was downstream from the cage in the chum line with Marty and Tom Allen.
Yeah.
And we heard this big banging sound, which we know is something crashing on the cage. Wondered what it was, and we swam back into the chum. You could see particles of fish and stuff drifting by, but we knew that's where the cage was, just followed the chum line. And when we got close enough to see the cage, we realized the sound was just with a frozen tuna bashing on the bars to get our attention, creating a huge cloud of chum, and there was a 14-foot great white shark circling the cage. And at that point, for all of us, it was the first white shark we'd ever seen, and being experienced divers and always being prepared and always having a plan, we did, right on the spot, realized that the plan is every man for himself. And I went for the cage, Marty went for the swim step, thinking there's two guys behind him that the shark's going to eat before it gets to him. But that wasn't the case. Tom and I went to the cage, and the shark went on the other side of the cage. I dove into the cage, pushed Jeremiah to the bottom of the cage, and stood on him. And Marty tried to get up the swim step in record time.
So if that's collaboration, I guess, whatever you call it.
Yeah.
Shooting those shows with.
That was all shot in 16 millimeter. We each had a clear ACL cameras. We built our own housings for them because you couldn't buy housings in those days. Back in those days, there probably wasn't more than 25 professional underwater filmmakers in the world. And we had two very good camera systems, and we could do as many Wild Kingdoms as we wanted to.
And we had done a bunch of blue sharks, and that's how we started. That was the first Wild Kingdom that I got to shoot was when Rod Allen had hurt his back, and I shot blue sharks in California. But we were really kind of pioneering the whole blue shark thing, and it's so weird now to hear how cavalier people are about sharks, and and all that. It just wasn't that way.
And also very different now, because you go out, you know, on a summer day and you put bait in the water off California, and if you're really lucky, one day in 3 you'll see a blue shark, and every other day you'll see a mako shark. Back when we did it in the 70s, you put bait in the water any day of the year. Any day of the year, we would guarantee production companies they'd have at least 15 blue sharks, have as many as 60. And when you have 60 sharks swimming around looking for something to eat, they don't have to be aggressive to bite you. They just come up when you're fooling with sharks that are in front of you, and just check out the back of your leg to see whether it's edible or not. They don't really attack, they just, you know, test you. And that's the way people got bit.
6 or 7, Pierre, Steve.
Yeah, we saw
Valerie.
half a dozen people get bit, you know, while we were out there doing that.
When was your first blue shark dive? How did you do that?
Would have been off California with Howard. I remember one time going out. We dropped
Bob?
the cage in. Probably
Or Larry?
must have been Bob. Cage, but I remember being in the cage and a blue shark swam into the cage, and you were pushing me down to try to keep me out of the way so that I wouldn't get hurt while you were trying to push the blue shark out. And I mean, blue sharks, I think now we think of them as being somewhat harmless unless you are in the midst of the chum line, but when they're in the cage and they get a little bit rattled and they're trying to get out and get a little bit toothy and bitey, and so yeah.
So if we move forward into the 80s and maybe into the 90s.
It's another 10 years, Howard. That's just...
Those are the units, unfortunately, that we are working with now. Decades. What happened in the industry in your careers? I'm interested in the advances in image making underwater and how that affected the productions or the projects you were working on, and and the growth of the industry as more folks started realizing they could get underwater with cameras.
Well, for almost 100 years, you could shoot 16 millimeter or 35 millimeter motion picture film. You created a movie that you could watch. You could transfer to videotape once that technology was available, and you could watch it on television. And that technology and those resolutions were available for 100 years. And then high definition video came along. What was that, 1999 about?
Probably
we got
roughly.
our camera in 2000.
And all of a sudden 16 millimeter anymore. So that depreciated all the 16 millimeter libraries. 10 years later, 4K came along and depreciated HD, and now we're shooting 8K. So in many ways, we're kind of in the dark ages of image curation, because libraries are depreciating. People aren't going to watch documentaries in 16 millimeter. They're not going to do it. They're in standard definition, very, very fuzzy compared to today's technology. And so those films and those libraries of films are just going to be archived or literally thrown away. And that whole resolution thing has been accelerating. A few years ago, I was shooting a 4K camera. Now I'm shooting an 8K. And you know, I haven't looked at my watch, but there's probably a 32K camera, coming.
Marty?
You guys need to say?
What I did is I got out. So I shot, my last film was shot on Super 16. I shot a shark film, co-produced a shark film for Nature. And then it went up into the video world, and it was a $70,000 to $100,000 investment. And I had a project lined up, and it fell through with Partridge Films. And then
You wised up.
I don't know that I did or I didn't. I sometimes
Brought
regret
some
it.
pens and pencils and.
Sometimes I regret that, and the most fun I ever had was being part of film crews. That was the best.
That was great.
And I got into situations where I would be on the lee side of the reef with a bunch of sport divers so that nobody got seasick, and I could see you guys on the other side of the reef having more fun, but probably seasick. So that was just kind of the change. And I just went back into the stills world and the writing world, and have been comfortable. I've had a good career with that. I think always you kind of second guess what you could have done or should have done, and I did what I did.
When you talk about the changes in technology and the way things have changed, when we were shooting 16 millimeter for television on the square CRT box at 480 lines of horizontal resolution, a used camera cost about $10,000. Then you had to build a housing, which cost another $3,000 or so. That's in 1975 dollars. Okay, if you wanted to buy a new 16 millimeter camera, they were $60,000 for a new 16 millimeter camera, which will produce an image quality that you wouldn't even watch on an iPhone now. In 2000, I bought a Sony 900 camera, and that camera, the best deal I could get, the body cost $88,000, and the lens cost $23,000. And then I had to build a housing for that. I had to buy batteries and a few other things. It was a very expensive investment, and it was good for 10 years and became obsolete. And I all but gave it away. And I have friends of mine that didn't give theirs away soon enough and can't even get rid of them. And the acceleration of technology is mind-boggling, but also the prices have come down. The 8K camera I'm shooting now costs $25,000. That's in today's dollars, which is a fraction of what my 16 millimeter camera cost and a tiny fraction of what my HD camera costs. And by 15, you'll be able to do IMAX films on your phone and in super high quality. And if you think I'm kidding, people are already making feature films on their phones and showing them in theaters. So that's where it's going.
One of the things that worked in our favor during the transition from film to video was that we got involved with the IMAX world, that world. So we started making IMAX films, and we were shooting in film, but while the rest of the world was sort of going through the transition from film to digital, we were shooting in film but in IMAX. And when we took a break from shooting in IMAX, we then invested in digital, but the newer generation of digital.
So instead of buying a camera, I bought a house.
Can we talk about shifting baselines? I know that's been something that we've been thinking about a lot, and I'm not sure folks watching this may know what it is, so we can maybe define it. But one thing that I've been really fascinated by is that the imagery we're seeing now is phenomenal. We have so many divers in the water with cameras of all sorts. Everybody has a couple shots that are fantastic, and we see them all aggregated on the internet. And it just feels like the ocean is exploding with life if you're on the outside looking in. But of course, through your careers, you've seen a big change in the ocean. Came into the ocean much later in the mid-90s, first time really underwater with a mask and a camera. And so that's set my expectations for what I would see in my lifetime, and it's gone down from there. So it'd be great to get your perspectives on that. And I've talked to Ron and Valerie in the past about this, and the stories you hear from the previous generation are so having to wait until the fish went by so you would have enough sun to take a picture. That's that kind of thing.
When I think of that, I don't know when I first heard the term shifting baselines. It was Jeremy Jackson, but it was clear. I think of the Cortez.
And Randy Olson created a website called shiftingbaselines.org, which if you haven't gone to that website, it's definitely worth looking at.
And there's this thing where, we've been in the business of selling diving and the experience and the adventure and want other people to do it, and yet there's a part of you or part of me that goes, I'm not selling the same thing I used to see, and that's just a fact.
Exactly.
And one of the things that's happened is you gain more experience. I'm doing things than I used to be, and so I see things that I didn't used to see. The ocean keeps opening up for me. But when I hear people go someplace and they say, "Oh, I see why you dive. It's so gorgeous," and I've just been to that place and I've kind of cringed. And the Cortez is one to me that we saw the demise of the Cortez in a way that was just, it was the Magic Kingdom when we started, and it went years where it just wasn't.
Yeah, commercial fishermen killed it.
Yeah,
absolutely killed it.
It's rebounding to some degree, and you want to be careful because I have friends that operate there, and I'm not trying to say that diving's not good or the Cortez isn't good or Australia's not good or whatever. It's not as good was.
Yeah,
and it just isn't.
Certainly isn't as good as it used to be. One of the encouraging things for me, though, is that protected areas have been established, and after a period of time of that area being an MPA, that life has rebounded. And one of the things that we experienced this year was, well, for me, it was the first time at Dumaguete. Howard had been there 30 years ago. We went in June of this year, and you thought it looked
as
quite
best I can
healthy.
remember, it looked pretty much the same as it was 30 years ago, except those hundreds of divers.
Well, that's true.
On it.
And it was also that 30 years ago, it's about the same time I went the first time, 35 years ago, there were lots of Tubatajas.
Yeah.
Well, that's true.
Tubataha was a very lovely reef, like a lot of lovely
Yes.
reefs. And now it's that,
foreign.
oh yeah, remember what it was.
Yeah,
And,
true.
and that's just the reality of it.
I mean, it is good that there's more divers out there, and divers on location help to maintain an awareness and keep the fishermen away. If we can get good divers who reef well, and
Fishermen aren't, I mean, we eat fish, or you may not, but the world does. And
but fishing illegally.
But fishing
That's what I
illegally,
mean.
and
so you get
sure.
down to Socorro, where it's a no fishing area, and the fishing boats are in there decimating the reef when they're not supposed to be there. That's
disgusting.
so you get dive boats out there, and they help keep that under there, and they're able to monitor.
Yeah, it becomes a financial benefit to stop fishing on some of these reefs when you have 30 or 40 dive boats going out to Tubataha every day. You know, killing the fish out there is economically a bad idea. So it's, you know, all conservation really is in many ways based on economics. And if it isn't, it's going to be sooner or later. And if you close down a place, you say, okay, nobody can dive here, no photography, no sport divers, no nothing, then you're not going to have anybody out there, and the fishermen are going to come in illegally and they're going to wipe it out. I've seen that happen numerous times. So as much as I dislike the idea of having 50 divers on the same reef that I'm diving and having them in the way and kicking a coral and breaking it, which, you know, grows back relatively fast, the alternative is worse, because if people aren't diving these places, they're going to get fished, and fishing does a lot of damage. And one of the primary reasons the ocean is going downhill is because of the dramatic overfishing that's been going on and continues to go on.
Of course, now it's by 9 or 7 billion of us, 3 billion of us, and that's really too many mouths to feed too many times a day, and everybody's got the same right to eat that we do.
I mean, one of the things I think the point you were trying to make is there's a paradox in that if you look at blue shark pictures, the best blue shark pictures were probably taken by digital photographers in the last 3 or 4 years, despite the fact that there's maybe 1 or 2% of the population left in California. When Marty and I went out there, you could get 25, 30, 40, 50 blue sharks every day. And we shot pictures with 35 millimeter still film, and you had to wait for a week to get the stuff processed, and it was easy to make a mistake. Now, you go out with a digital camera, 1,300 pictures on a dive, and you immediately look at the screen on the back of the camera, and you get instantaneous feedback. So you quickly get good at it. And we didn't have that when we were starting out. So even though there's far fewer blue sharks, hundreds of times more images are being captured. And the best of those images are rising to the top, and that's what we're seeing.
But it gives the world that everything's healthy.
Right.
Right.
And that's the catch-22.
So where can people go to learn more about? I mean, we're very practical, and so are there places that you could recommend where people can go learn more about how they can get involved, or even the state of the ocean?
Well, certainly you should go to shiftingbaseline.org. That's a really good website for explaining what shifting baseline is and explaining that when you go diving, if it's your first dive, you're going to be mesmerized by how many beautiful fish you see and the beautiful coral, but that doesn't mean that's pristine. There probably isn't such thing as a pristine reef anymore. I remember diving at to a reef called Crystal Reef, a very small area, and I made a dive there with Michele, and it was the most beautiful place I think I've ever seen. It was just absolutely gorgeous. There was lots of fish, loggerhead turtle, or hawksbill turtles, I guess, and spectacular corals, clear water. And Mark Hayes, who was the skipper of the boat, said he doesn't like to dive there anymore. And I went, great, it's great. It was one of the best dives I've made in a long time. He says, yeah, but when I first started diving here, I would see 7 species of sharks on every single dive. I'd see tuna, I'd see all this stuff that isn't there now. And I don't have that in my memory. So what I saw is this absolutely spectacular reef. What Greg saw is a reef that's been decimated. So that's shifting baseline.
The conflict is, if you say that in the wrong way, you discourage people from getting involved, and then you don't have as many eyes out there. And you're right about, I mean, we need the economics. That's the whole thing, is we need the diving community. We need everybody to be out there with eyes in the ocean. And in some ways, we're in part responsible. I mean, we contributed to that. We went to places that certainly never been dived, wrote about them. Here came the world.
People.
Then
Exactly.
here came a resort. Then here came fishermen, or the fishermen may have been there, but it gets overdone. And again, I think that goes back to that when we were born, there was 3 billion of us, and now there's 7.
I do think that there are a variety of websites that have been created that impart some. Reef Check is one. Reef. Is it reef.org?
Yeah.
Is another. Coral Reef Restoration is doing, I think, seems to me, doing great work down in the Florida Keys. They're learning about how to repopulate a reef and get corals growing, and then they implant them.
And you know, one of the things, when I first out and tried to get into the environmental organizations, I was intimidated. I didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And the fact is, they need help. They all want volunteers. They want your money, but if you can't give money, they want volunteers. You just got to knock on a door.
Yeah.
And if you go, they will get you into the program if you've got something to offer at all. And that's, I think, a way is you network and you learn. It's sitting at your desk or sitting at your computer, or you can learn by getting out there and mixing it up with the world. And I think that's networking is a great way to do it.
And I think Sylvia Earle's Mission Blue has done tremendous things. Her Hope Spots, which I believe started with a TED Talk that she gave. I'm not sure if this is totally accurate, but she got some seed money. What would you like to do with this money? And she created this spots, and there are new Hope Spots around the world thanks to the work that Sylvia's doing. She's done a lot of
and
good.
there are lots of people. There
Yes,
are lots of
yes,
people
of
doing that,
course.
and that's one of the things you learn. And one of the problems is there's so many organizations, you can get frustrated and not know how to get started. But there's so many grassroots people that are doing all this, lots of the shark organizations
And I like CSAVE. I think it's CSAVE Foundation, Georgine Bradley and Jay Ireland, and they're all about political legislation and going to CITES, and also CORE, C-O-A-R-E,
Christmas.
Topher Chin. Topher Chin.
And the producers of this video will put those names right down at the bottom.
Adding to my post-production.
That's right.
And I served on the board of Reef for 7 or 8 years, and I mean, the truth is, I'm not on it now, so I can brag, but Reef does some great stuff. And the whole citizen science is just given its expanded science's ability to do things that scientists can't afford to do. There's no budget. But the whole volunteer thing with citizen science, it makes people help. You don't have to be a marine biologist to do some good in the world.
So Marty, your T-shirt says the Dumaguete dive team, Howard and Marty's 70th and 70th birthdays. So we're here celebrating your birthdays, some other birthdays. I have been looking forward to coming here because this is the, aside from conventions or DEMA or something where you get to hang out with people in the industry in a very different environment. But this is the first time I've been in the water with you and with a whole bunch of other people. What are your thoughts about this gathering? I mean, it's been such an amazing experience to be here with all of you.
I think this is one of the coolest things I've ever done in the diving world. Just a fun thing to do. And I had always kind of fantasized about, I live in San Diego, and just about having some affiliation with a tropical resort, so I could go dive in warm, clear water. And I kind of just happenstance was able to kind of hook up down here, and I'm one of our 2 photography ambassadors. Although I can't get anybody to call me Mr. Ambassador, I've tried.
It's not gonna happen.
But and what really happened is we went.
Yep.
You and me and Lynn and Howard, we went on a hike last
That's right. New Year's Day.
And I had thought about this New Year's Eve and thought, okay, I'm going to ask you guys if you want to do it. I didn't think you would.
I thought you were crazy. I never thought it would.
Before or after that?
Yeah, yes, yes.
And we thought maybe we'd get 15 or 20 people to come.
Who would fly to Philippines, all the way to the Philippines to go diving and celebrate?
We had 36 people show up in the Philippines to celebrate our birthday. And of course, you only turn 70 once, and a lot of people don't even make that. So it's a special day. It's a special, a special birthday, and it was extremely gratifying to have so many friends, go to the trouble and the expense of coming all the way to the Philippines to dive with us and celebrate our birthdays. We had a we'll remember it for a long time.
Hopefully.
So here's the thing. Hopefully remember. Here's the thing. Somebody came to me this afternoon and said, has anybody asked about having a reunion and doing this again? And I said, I turned 70 in 2 years.
That would be wonderful, because Howard and I talked about it and said we're going to do this again in 10 years. And we're all going to go to the Krispy Kreme because that's all we're going to have left.
In the meantime.
Would be
Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I bet a bunch of this gang would come back.
I think so.
And Atlantis has been really good to us in doing this. They really supported the idea and said take a chance. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
But,
It's been
the diving's been great, and the scenery's great. The sunsets are spectacular. We have a full right here that can make up almost anything you can imagine. And it's just been great fun.
Yeah.
This is water, just because I'm hydrating after diving. But mango daiquiri is in my future.
Before the evening.
Mango daiquiri or a mudslide.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for everything.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thanks for all. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.